right? Does that, I think. Another example of the what has always happened is will always, you get it. Hi, I'm Gabriella and welcome to Digital Spy's YouTube channel. This video is all about Tenet. We're gonna go into some ending explained kind of stuff, some unanswered questions, some questions that should have probably been answered and weren't. So if you haven't seen Tenet, avoid this video at all costs because it is going to be chock full of spoilers, but we also have a feeling that you may still be just as confused once the video is over. Anyway, let's get going. So we're going to break this down into some sections for you to try and make it a little bit more manageable. The first thing we're going to tackle is what exactly is Tenet?
Tenet.
At the beginning of the film, John David Washington's character, the protagonist, who does not get a name, is rescued by someone after nearly dying, protecting his teammates, and he's brought back to life by a man who arms him with the word Tenet. And he says to use it sparingly and to be careful when he uses it, but it's kind of like a get out of jail free card. And he uses it more often than I thought he would, but essentially what Tenet is an organization that is trying to stop a big bad guy, who we'll get into in a minute, from basically ending the world. And Tenet is an organization that knows how to use time inversion in order to prevent this from happening. Which leads us nicely into our next question, which is, what is time inversion? So time inversion is different from time travel. Time travel implies that you as an individual move through time at your will to any point, any place, whatever. Think, the TARDIS. In Tenet, it's time inversion, which is a very, very specific thing, and they're very kind of keen to make you aware of that, but also they're not overly explanatory on it, which actually works really well in the film because, as Clemens Poesy's character says, you just kind of have to feel it, and the film really inspires you to do that. Time inversion is when an object or a person is manipulated in and of themselves so that they move backwards through time. And what that effectively means is that, let's say I was inverted right now and I went to sleep at 10 o'clock at night on Wednesday, I would wake up on Tuesday morning. So I'm moving backwards through time, but the rest of the world is still kind of going forwards, as it were. What that means for me as the inverted person, it looks like everyone else around me is going backwards. They're not, they're going forwards. I'm the outlier. I'm the object or the person that is inverted in our kind of current timeline. But to outside observers, I'll look like I'm going backwards because I am going backwards. Now, of course, what this means is that if I lift a cup to my face to drink, the motion will look backwards to someone else. Like a boomerang, right? Instagram boomerang, you get it. Okay, so we've covered time inversion, but that's not the only time manipulating concept that they have in Tenet. The other one is the algorithm. And the algorithm was invented in the future by a scientist who, along with the kind of leaders of the future, have decided that the planet is in such dire straits that the only choice they have left is to send the whole world backwards in time. So not only to have objects or people inverted, but to reverse the entropy of the world, which is an odd choice of word because entropy, to my mind, was always that as things move forward in time, they decay. And I think the decay element is kind of key to what entropy is, but I'm not a physicist, obviously. So the scientists in the future decide that they're going to take the timeline. There's only one timeline in Tenet. This is not a multiverse, multi-timeline thing. They're going to take the timeline and send it backwards. So kind of throw everything into reverse, throw the universe into reverse. So the scientist creates this algorithm, and realizing the kind of extent of what she's done, which is that the algorithm will eventually end the world, right? Because if you take the universe, if you take the Earth. I'm just remembering that Superman where he flies around the planet in the other way and then makes time go backwards. That's really what Tenet is. Oh my God. It's just Superman. So that revelation aside, they decide that they're going to send the timeline backwards. They're going to reverse, to use their lingo, they're going to reverse the entropy of the world. I still take issue with that. So the scientist realizes that eventually this will obviously end the world because you'll get back through evolution and then the reverse Big Bang, and then we won't exist at all. This does key into something that Neil, the character played by Robert Pattinson, brings up with John David Washington. They have a conversation about the grandfather paradox, which is that if you go back in time and kill your grandfather, won't you essentially be killing yourself, which would prevent you from going back in time and killing your grandfather in the first place? They never really addressed that. They kind of just... The way that Neil explains it is that the future was so bleak and so desperate that this was their only choice. And they had to take whatever risks that came with because they were in such bad shape that this was the only option they had left. So the scientist who's created this algorithm, however, realizes that she's effectively creating the end of the world. So she destroys the algorithm, which is a physical thing. When we think about algorithms now, we think of computer formulas. This is a computer formula made physical, made tangible. So she breaks it into 9 pieces and scatters them, inverts them into the past. Why she doesn't just destroy it, I don't know, but I guess, you know, human nature, right? I guess it's her baby. She really doesn't want to give it up. She's put a lot of work into it, I bet. So she sends all these pieces back in time knowing that they will be safe there, or assuming they'll be safe there. Of course she's wrong, they're not safe there, because the future still, the big baddie people in the future who we don't really know about at all, ever, they still want to assemble the algorithm and enact their plan. So they recruit from the past a young man named Sator. So Sator is the big bad of the film, played by Kenneth Branagh.
How would you like to die?
Old.
Who, as a young man, maybe in like his 20s, is recruited by the future. He gets a job cleaning up a kind of nuclear waste in his hometown in the USSR that had been devastated by a nuclear accident, basically, I think is the scene that they've set. While he's doing that, he finds a box, and in the box is a note from the future that basically explains everything I just explained, only probably a little more concisely. And it sets Sator on this path to assembling all the pieces of the algorithm for the future. But what happens as he ages is he develops terminal cancer, and this only infuriates him and kind of motivates him even more to end the world. And I think he's more aware of the fact that once the algorithm is activated, that the world is going to end, but he doesn't give a shit. So Sator's plan hinges on the activation of the algorithm, and the way that this works is through an explosion. Now, the explosion is sort of the inflection point of the timeline of the film. And even though when we talk about the event of the final battle in the film, and we use kind of the future tense, in reality, in the timeline of the film, the final battle takes place on the very same day as the beginning of the film. It takes place on the same day as the opera mission that John David Washington is on. So it just kind of reinforces the time loop idea that Christopher Nolan has got going on in this film. So on the day of the explosion, Sator has a dead man switch attached to a like Fitbit-like thing that he has on his wrist, and his plan is to kill himself, thus activating the explosion, which in turn activates the algorithm. So the Tenet organization's job or mission is to remove the algorithm from the explosion area. Now, the way that they decide to do this is through what they call a temporal pincer, which is effectively when one team or person goes from the future, inverts themselves, and fills in the team moving forward on the things that have already happened. So a key feature to remember about the temporal pincer, but also about everything that happens in Tenet, is the philosophy that what has always happened, And it's really important to remember this, and you just kind of have to go with it a little bit. And what it means is that the red team, which is the Tenet team moving forward in time toward the inflection point, the explosion, always is successful. And they always were successful in this closed time loop that is the movie Tenet, that is the events of the movie Tenet. Their success is what allows the blue team to exist in the future and travel backwards to fill in the red team in order that they succeed. It's all part of this kind of grandfather paradox, determinism, what has always happened, philosophy. Really, it feels like a philosophy. You can't explain it, right? And that's kind of the beauty about the film, is it doesn't try to explain it with science. It doesn't overdo it and trying to make it make sense. Part of the beauty is that it doesn't make sense, and you just have to feel it, right? Like they said, you just gotta feel it. So effectively, the battle is won because it always has been won, and they always will get the algorithm out. And this happens kind of irrespectively of Kat's attempts to stall Sator's suicide, and then eventually she just to get her revenge on him, to kill him. It's a bit confusing as to what her purpose is in that moment beyond stalling him, when he was always only ever going to kill himself at that certain point, and they always knew that. I guess the wild card is that maybe he could kill himself early and they didn't know that. Or her delaying him is helping them get more time. But again, what happened always happened. So she always did it. You can't parse it too much. That's our explanation. Just don't think about it too much. Another key person in not only in the plot, but also in the temporal pincer movement and in the success of the temporal pincer movement is Neil, played by Robert Pattinson. And the reason that he's so key is that you get the feeling kind of early on that maybe he knows more than he's letting on. And for me, it was, a flag was raised about Neil when in the Freeport scene, he lets the mystery men who come out of the turnstile, he lets them go. Of course, we later learn that he let him go because it's John David Washington, it's the protagonist. The fact that he chose to do that, I think, for me, was like, oh, he knows more about what is going on here than he's telling anybody. By the time you get to the final battle at the film, you're well aware that he knows a lot more than he's letting on. One of the things that's really key to Neil is another future Neil, which is effectively the same Neil in the present, has at some point inverted himself so that he ends up in that kind of epicenter of the explosion where Sator's men are placing the algorithm. It's done quite cleverly because you don't really know until after it's happened. There is a turnstile thingy there. Convenient, I know. And Neil inverts himself again from the future to go back to that point in the battle to put himself on the locked side of the kind of cage door where the big bad guy is putting the algorithm. So when the protagonist and Ives come into the tunnel to try and stop him, because he's in reverse, the dead body of this man, who they don't know at the time is Neil, jumps up, effectively takes a bullet, but for him it's in reverse, and unlocks the door for them to be able to grab the algorithm. Now, it's really sad and quite sweet, and again, it plays into the idea that what happened will always happen. But it also kind of opens up room for a sequel, maybe? He says at the end, we get up to some stuff with him and the protagonist. So take that as you will. A good way of keeping track of who's inverted and who isn't is to look for the oxygen masks, because people who are inverted can't breathe air the way normal people do. So keep an eye out for the masks. That'll help you distinguish who's inverted and who's not. There's some other cool effects that take place around this idea that inverted people can't interact with the world the same way that normal people do. When the car that the protagonist is in explodes, it turns to ice because John David Washington inside begins to freeze because he is inverted, right? So there's some really cool little plays on that. Again, you can't look too closely, right? Because eventually an inverted person would need to drink water and eat food to survive. So really you could only be inverted for some time without, I guess, getting an IV drip. But would that, of inverted water? I'm thirsty now. What is up with Kat? She spends a lot of it on a gurney, to my great disappointment. You know, she is a good example of what has happened will always happen. And in the beginning of the film, she tells the protagonist a story about when she's leaving the yacht that's in Vietnam, which is on the same day as the explosion, which is the same day as the final battle. Just to make things more confusing, she saw a woman diving off the side of the yacht, and she talks to the protagonist about how much she envied that woman's freedom. Now, what you learn at the end of the film is that the woman that she saw diving off the boat was herself from the future, having been inverted to the point where she's on the yacht, kills Sator, and then dives off the boat. And I thought that was quite a nice touch, that the freedom that Kat needed and wanted so desperately was hers for the taking, and she took it. I think that was kind of a really beautiful little nugget for her. Did we want more? Of course we wanted more, but we always want more Elizabeth Debicki because she's amazing. So that's it. That's all of Tenet's major themes and characters and plot points explained to the best of my ability. I'm not a physicist, so I could be totally wrong on half the things I've just said. Let's hope not. What I think is really cool about Tenet is it's definitely a film that is open to interpretation and dissection, kind of really to think about and chew on for a bit. So if you have any questions or theories or comments or suggestions, let us know in the comments below. And if you like what you've seen, you can always like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. But for now, I'm just gonna say thanks for watching.